The sound of flesh striking flesh echoed through the first-class cabin. Aiden's small hand touched his reddening cheek, tears welling in his dark eyes. The stewardess, Victoria Whitmore, stood over him, her pale face contorted with disgust. "Children, like you don't belong in first class," she hissed. Then a broad-shouldered black man in an impeccable suit rose from his seat, fury emanating from him like heat. "That's my son you just assaulted," he said quietly. "And I own this airline." Victoria's world imploded in that moment. How would this shocking act of discrimination change both their lives forever? Before we continue this jaw-dropping story of injustice and redemption, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe in standing up against discrimination and fighting for justice, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on more powerful stories that expose the truth about our society. Elijah Washington had never imagined his life would take such a dramatic turn. At 37, the brilliant black entrepreneur had transformed a struggling regional carrier into Horizon Airlines, one of the nation's fastest-growing air travel companies. Starting with just 2 leased planes and a vision for more inclusive air travel, Elijah had built an empire through sheer determination and business acumen that even his harshest critics couldn't deny. His greatest joy wasn't his corner office or the industry accolades, but his 4-year-old son, Aiden. The boy had his mother's gentle eyes and curious spirit, constantly asking questions about clouds and jet engines. Aiden loved airplanes with the pure passion only children can muster, collecting model aircraft and wearing his child-sized pilot's uniform until the elbows wore thin. The past year had been devastating for both of them. Elijah's wife, Tara, had lost her battle with aggressive breast cancer, leaving father and son to navigate their grief together. Through the darkest days, Elijah had promised himself that Aiden would never lack for love or opportunity, despite having lost his mother. Their bond had grown unbreakable through bedtime stories, weekend museum trips, and Aiden's endless questions about how mommy had become a star in the sky. Today's flight was special, Aiden's first time experiencing his father's airline, not as a passenger, but as the son of the CEO. Elijah had arranged for them to fly from Chicago to Los Angeles, allowing Aiden to meet pilots, visit the cockpit before takeoff, and see how everything operated. The excitement in Aiden's eyes when he received his special junior executive badge made all of Elijah's hard work worthwhile. Victoria Whitmore didn't share their enthusiasm. The 45-year-old senior flight attendant had spent over 2 decades in the skies, serving first-class passengers with practiced smiles that never quite reached her eyes. When Horizon Airlines had been acquired 5 years ago, Victoria had bristled at the thought of working under black management. Her family hadn't raised her to serve those people. They were supposed to serve her. Though she maintained a professional facade, Victoria had developed subtle methods for managing black passengers who dared enter her first-class cabin. Mysterious delays in service, conveniently running out of preferred meal options, suggesting perhaps they'd be more comfortable in main cabin. Her techniques were difficult to prove, but effective at making certain passengers feel unwelcome. When Victoria spotted Elijah and Aiden boarding first class, her lip instinctively curled. Another one of them thinking money erased all boundaries. And bringing a child? First class was for serious travelers, not playground antics. She immediately assumed they must be in the wrong section, despite their immaculate attire and the respect shown by other crew members. "Victoria, that's Elijah Washington," her colleague Mark whispered as they prepared the pre-flight beverages. "He's the CEO." "I don't care if he's Barack Obama," Victoria muttered, arranging champagne flutes with unnecessary force. "First class has standards. Children disrupt the experience for real premium passengers." Mark gave her a warning look before moving on. Victoria watched as Elijah settled Aiden into the window seat, patiently helping him with the seatbelt and showing him the safety card. The boy was well behaved, she had to admit, but that wasn't the point. They simply didn't belong. As the final boarding announcement sounded, Victoria saw her opportunity. Elijah's phone rang, and after checking the screen, he apologetically told Aiden he needed to take an important call. "I'll be right back, buddy. Just 2 minutes by the galley, okay? Be good for Miss Victoria." Aiden nodded solemnly, clutching his toy airplane as his father stepped away. Victoria's smile sharpened into something predatory as she moved toward the unattended child. It was time to establish who really controlled this cabin. Aiden Washington sat quietly in his plush first-class seat, making his small toy airplane soar in gentle arcs above his tray table. His movements were measured and careful, creating just enough engine sounds with his lips to fuel his imagination without disturbing other passengers. Occasionally, he would glance toward the galley where his father stood talking on the phone, serious expressions softening whenever their eyes met. Victoria Whitmore approached with deliberate steps, adjusting her perfectly pressed uniform. "Excuse me," she said, voice laced with artificial sweetness that didn't match her cold eyes. "Are you sure you're in the right seat? First class is for our executive travelers." "My daddy said this is our seat," Aiden replied politely, his voice small but clear. "He's the boss of the whole airplane company." Victoria's smile tightened. "Aren't you creative? I'm sure your father works for the airline in some capacity." She emphasized the word "some" with unmistakable condescension. "But perhaps you'd be more comfortable in the main cabin where other families usually sit." When Aiden remained in place, Victoria escalated her tactics. She hovered unnecessarily close, repeatedly adjusting items around him. She moved his apple, juice far from his reach without asking, claiming it might spill, while placing white passengers' drinks conveniently at hand. When Aiden politely asked for his drink back, Victoria pretended not to hear him, rushing to attend to a blonde woman who had barely lifted a finger. "Is everything perfect for you, Mrs. Hartwell?" Victoria inquired, ignoring Aiden's raised hand. Across the aisle, businessman Tucker Reed received a warm towel and drink refill without asking, while Victoria, accidentally, bumped Aiden's seat repeatedly when passing. Each time, the boy steadied his toy and himself, trying to maintain the good behavior his father expected. "Excuse me, miss." Aiden finally tried again when Victoria passed. "May I please have my juice? I'm busy serving priority passengers right now," she replied curtly. "You'll have to wait." The elderly white couple seated behind Aiden exchanged uncomfortable glances, but said nothing. In the window row across from them, a woman in a hijab received similarly dismissive treatment when requesting a blanket, while Victoria promptly delivered one to a white male passenger who hadn't even asked. The tension escalated when Victoria deliberately jostled Aiden's arm while leaning across, him to serve the window seat passenger. The sudden movement startled the boy, causing his small hand to knock over the juice that Victoria had finally returned, but placed precariously at the edge of his tray. The orange liquid splashed onto Victoria's skirt. "You did that on purpose," she shrieked, drawing every eye in the cabin. "This uniform costs more than your father probably makes in a week." "I'm sorry," Aiden whispered, eyes wide with shock and embarrassment. "It was an accident. Children like you have no business." "In first class," Victoria hissed, voice dripping with disdain that went beyond the spilled drink. "This is what happens when people don't know their place." What happened next occurred so quickly that passengers would later give slightly different accounts to investigators. Victoria's hand swung in a sharp arc, connecting with Aiden's cheek, with a crack that silenced the entire cabin. The boy's head jerked sideways from the impact, his toy plane falling from his grip as his small hand rose to his stinging face. In the horrified silence that followed, Elijah Washington appeared like an avenging angel, phone call forgotten as he witnessed the assault on his son. His face transformed from disbelief to cold fury as he covered the distance to their seats in 3 long strides. "That's my son you just assaulted," he said, voice deadly quiet, yet carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent cabin. "And I own this airline." Victoria's smug expression crumbled as reality crashed in. Not some entry-level employee with delusions of grandeur. This was Elijah Washington, CEO and majority shareholder of Horizon Airlines. Her skin paled to a sickly white as she recognized her catastrophic error. "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding," she stammered, backing away. "The boy was disruptive and I was simply—" "I saw exactly what happened," interrupted Mrs. Hartwell, the blonde woman Victoria had been fawning over. "That child was perfectly behaved, and you struck him after you caused him to spill his drink." Other passengers began nodding in agreement, smartphones already recording the aftermath. The elderly couple who had watched everything unfold added their confirmation, while the Muslim woman who'd been denied a blanket stood to offer Aiden a comforting smile. Victoria's panic escalated as Mark appeared from the galley, horror evident on his face. "Victoria, what have you done?" he whispered. "I want you off this flight," Elijah stated, gathering Aiden into his arms. "As of this moment, you are suspended pending investigation. Captain Reynolds will be informed that we require an emergency crew change before departure." Victoria's composure completely shattered. "You can't do that. I've been with this airline for 20 years. It's not my fault if some people can't control their children." Her voice rose hysterically, mask falling away entirely. "This is still America. You people don't get to tell me what to do just because you got lucky with some affirmative action promotion." The collective gasp from passengers was audible as Victoria's true colors emerged fully. Mark physically stepped between her and the Washingtons as Elijah shielded his son's ears from the venomous outburst. "Security will escort you from this aircraft," Elijah stated with remarkable restraint. "And I suggest you save whatever remains of your dignity by leaving quietly. Do you think there's any excuse for hitting a child? Comment number 1 if you believe Victoria deserved immediate termination, or number 2 if you think everyone deserves a second chance. Don't forget to hit that like button if you're shocked by this blatant discrimination in action. And subscribe to hear what happens next in this explosive confrontation between corporate power and deep-seated prejudice. Will Elijah's status as CEO be enough to bring Victoria to justice? Or are some systems too broken to fix even from the top? Let's continue this incredible true story of racial injustice in American skies. The Horizon Airlines first-class cabin remained in stunned silence as airport security personnel escorted a still protesting Victoria Whitmore through the jetway. Elijah Washington sat with Aiden curled against his chest, the boy's small shoulders trembling as his father whispered reassurances. The angry red mark on Aiden's cheek had begun to darken, a physical manifestation of the trauma that would leave deeper, invisible scars. "It's okay now, buddy," Elijah murmured, stroking his son's hair. "She can't hurt you anymore. Daddy's here." But even as he comforted his child, Elijah was already in motion professionally. With one hand cradling Aiden, he used the other to text his executive team, fingers flying across the screen with urgent precision. "Serious incident on Flight 1876. Senior FA physically assaulted my son. Racially motivated. Need immediate response team at LAX. Full investigation required. Documenting everything." Around them, the cabin buzzed with shocked conversations as flight attendant Mark efficiently reorganized the crew duties to cover Victoria's absence. Several passengers approached to offer support and contact information as witnesses, while others pretended to be absorbed in magazines or devices, uncomfortable with the racial dynamics laid bare in their exclusive cabin. "Mr. Washington," said an elderly white woman who had watched everything unfold, "I've never seen such appalling behavior from airline staff in all my years of flying. Please let me know if you need another witness statement. That woman should never work in customer service again." Elijah thanked her with a nod, focusing on documenting evidence before memory could be rewritten. He discreetly photographed Aiden's reddened cheek and collected business cards from willing witnesses. The first-class cabin had become a crime scene of sorts, with Elijah methodically preserving every detail. Meanwhile, in the cramped crew area, Victoria Whitmore was having a complete meltdown. The gravity of her actions was sinking in, career suicide playing in slow motion before her eyes. 20 years of seniority, pension benefits, and status, all potentially gone because of one impulsive moment with the wrong passenger. "This can't be happening," she muttered, frantically scrolling through her phone contacts. Her fingers hovered over several names before selecting Bradley Cooper, Vice President of Operations. Bradley had always appreciated her traditional values during company social events, making comments about how the airline had changed since the new ownership. If anyone could help her navigate this disaster, it would be Bradley. As the call connected, Victoria rehearsed her version of events. An unruly child, repeated warnings, a light disciplinary touch misinterpreted by an oversensitive parent playing the race card. By the time Bradley answered, her alternate reality was firmly established in her mind. "Victoria? What's going on?" "I'm heading into a meeting." Bradley's voice sounded harried. "Bradley, thank God you answered. I have a situation." Victoria's voice dropped to a desperate whisper as she explained her heavily edited version of events. Washington is threatening my job over proper cabin management. You know how these people can be. Any attempt at discipline and suddenly everything is racism. There was a pause before Bradley responded, his voice tightening with concern. Not for Victoria's victim, but for potential corporate fallout. Did anyone record this? I don't think so, but there were witnesses. Most of them regular first class. Passengers who understand standards must be maintained, Victoria replied, strategically omitting the passengers who had spoken against her. Listen carefully, Bradley instructed. Say absolutely nothing more to anyone. Sign nothing. I'll meet the flight at LAX and intercept before this escalates. We'll handle it internally. No police involvement necessary. Victoria's relief was palpable. Thank you, Bradley. I knew you'd understand this is just a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Just sit tight and follow procedure. We'll make this go away, Bradley assured her before ending the call. Back in the first-class cabin, Aiden had finally fallen into exhausted sleep against his father's chest. Elijah continued working his phone, adding his chief legal officer and head of human resources to the communication chain. The incident report he drafted was meticulously detailed, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The plane finally departed, nearly an hour behind schedule. As they reached cruising altitude, the reassigned flight attendants provided exemplary service, their professionalism a stark contrast to Victoria's behavior. Yet Elijah couldn't help noticing the uncomfortable glances from several white passengers, their expressions suggesting that perhaps he had overreacted, caused unnecessary delay, or wielded his power too forcefully. When the plane finally touched, down at LAX, Elijah expected to see his crisis management team waiting. Instead, he was met by Bradley Cooper, whose tight smile didn't reach his eyes. Beside him stood two airline security officers, rather than the LAPD officers Elijah had requested. Elijah, let's handle this unfortunate misunderstanding discreetly, Bradley said smoothly, steering him toward a private lounge while signaling the security officers to intercept any approaching witnesses. No need for police involvement in what's clearly an internal HR matter. Misunderstanding? Elijah echoed incredulously, protectively adjusting his sleeping son in his arms. Your employee physically assaulted my 4-year-old child and hurled racial slurs in front of a cabin full of witnesses. That's assault and a civil rights violation. Bradley's expression remained impassive. Let's not escalate terminology. I've already begun an internal investigation. These things require careful consideration of all perspectives. His gaze flicked to Aiden and back to Elijah. Children can sometimes be difficult on flights, even well-behaved ones. High altitude affects behavior. In that moment, Elijah realized with chilling clarity that Victoria Whitmore wasn't a rogue employee, but a symptom of something far more insidious within his own company. The battle ahead would be fought not just against one racist flight attendant, but against an entrenched system that had operated beneath his notice until it had literally struck his own child. The police have already been called, Elijah stated firmly. And this isn't an internal HR matter anymore, Bradley. This is a criminal assault against my son. Bradley's facade of concern hardened into something colder. I've already spoken with the airport police. They understand this is being handled internally. Your approach is creating unnecessary liability for the company you supposedly care about, Elijah. As other passengers from the flight were directed away from the area by airline staff, Elijah saw the first signs of a cover-up in motion. The same company he had built from nothing was now closing ranks, not to protect him and his son, but to shield Victoria Whitmore from the consequences of her actions. The sleek conference room on the top floor of Horizon Airlines headquarters had once been Elijah Washington's sanctuary. With floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the city skyline, it had been where he crafted his vision for a more inclusive airline industry. Now, less than 24 hours after Victoria Whitmore had struck his son, that same room felt like an elaborate trap. Elijah, you have to understand how this looks, Bradley Cooper said, spreading his manicured hands across the polished mahogany table. A senior executive demanding the termination of a long-term employee over what many would see as a routine discipline situation. The optics are problematic. Elijah stared at his VP of operations in disbelief. Routine discipline? She slapped my 4-year-old son across the face, Bradley. There were over a dozen witnesses. There's a bruise on his cheek that I've had documented by a physician. Children get disciplined on flights all the time when they misbehave, interjected Heather Winters, the head of HR who had always seemed supportive until now. Victoria has submitted a detailed incident report describing disruptive behavior that was affecting other premium passengers. That's an absolute fabrication, Elijah responded, struggling to maintain his composure. Aiden was quietly playing with a toy. Multiple passengers have already emailed statements confirming this. Bradley exchanged glances with Heather before continuing in a tone one might use to explain simple concepts to a child. Elijah, we all support diversity initiatives, but playing the race card over routine cabin management sets a dangerous precedent. The phrase race card landed like a physical blow. Elijah had built Horizon Airlines on principles of excellence and equity, carefully avoiding making his race central to the company narrative. He had naively believed that his success would speak for itself, that the corporate culture would naturally reflect his values. Now, watching Bradley and Heather rewrite reality before his eyes, he recognized his critical oversight. I want to review the security footage, Elijah stated firmly. Every first-class cabin has surveillance. The video will show exactly what happened. Unfortunately, there seems to be a technical issue with the recording system on that particular aircraft, Heather replied too quickly. It is looking into it, but apparently there's no usable footage. Elijah's blood ran cold. That's impossible. I personally oversaw the installation of that system. It backs up to 3 separate secure servers. Well, I've been informed otherwise, Bradley replied with a dismissive wave. But what matters now is handling this situation appropriately. We've scheduled a disciplinary review for Victoria next week, where all perspectives will be considered. All perspectives? Elijah repeated incredulously. On hitting a child? Allegedly hitting, Heather corrected. We have to follow due process. Leaving the meeting, Elijah headed straight to the IT department, only to find his executive access codes mysteriously deactivated. The security footage, that would have definitively proven Victoria's actions and vindicated Aiden, was now beyond his reach in his own company. As Elijah returned to his office, his assistant Jennifer handed him a printout with a troubled expression. This memo has been circulating through middle management since this morning. I thought you should see it. The document made Elijah's stomach churn. Marked, confidential, internal discussion only, it outlined concerns about executive overreach and potential misuse of authority in personal matters. Without naming Elijah directly, it described a situation where an executive's child was allegedly misbehaving in first class, and standard customer management techniques were employed. Most disturbing was the line suggesting certain executives may be leveraging racial sensitivity to override established procedures. The memo was unsigned, but clearly crafted to shape internal narrative. More alarmingly, it had reached dozens of department heads and managers before Elijah even knew of its existence. Jennifer, who else has seen this? He asked quietly. It's everywhere, she admitted. People are taking sides already. Some are saying Victoria is being railroaded because... Her voice trailed off uncomfortably. Because I'm black, Elijah finished for her. They think I'm playing the race card. Jennifer nodded unhappily. There's more. Victoria has filed a counter-complaint alleging hostile work environment and intimidation. She's claiming you're using your position to persecute her for doing her job because of racial hypersensitivity. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about protecting one racist flight attendant. This was a coordinated effort to undermine Elijah's authority and reframe the narrative. Victoria's actions had revealed a network of executives who resented working under black leadership and seized this opportunity to challenge it. Elijah's phone buzzed with an urgent message from his assistant. Emergency board meeting called for 9 a.m. tomorrow to discuss recent leadership concerns and public relations implications. Bradley requested the meeting. The corporate machinery he had built was now turning against him, and by extension, against his son. Victoria Whitmore hadn't acted alone. She had been enabled by a system that shared her biases. A system that operated within Elijah's own company right under his nose, waiting for the perfect moment to reassert what they believed was the natural order. That night, as Elijah gently applied arnica cream to Aiden's bruised cheek, the boy looked up with innocent confusion. "Daddy, why did that lady hit me? Was I bad?" The question broke Elijah's heart. "No, buddy. You weren't bad at all. That lady did a very wrong thing, and she's the one in trouble, not you." "Then why did the airport police let her go? You always say when people do bad things, they get consequences." Out of the mouths of babes. Elijah struggled to explain systemic injustice to a 4-year-old when he was still processing the betrayal himself. How could he tell his son that sometimes people escape consequences because the system is designed to protect them? That even a CEO couldn't guarantee justice when prejudice ran through the veins of the very institution he thought he controlled. As Aiden finally drifted to sleep, Elijah's phone lit up with a message from Heather in HR. "Victoria Whitmore has filed a formal harassment complaint against you for creating a hostile work environment. The board has been notified. Legal recommends you recuse yourself from all related decisions pending investigation." The trap was now fully sprung. His own company had declared war, not just on Elijah Washington, the CEO, but on Aiden Washington, a 4-year-old victim whose only crime had been existing in a space where Victoria Whitmore believed he didn't belong. Airline CEO terrorizes employee. Exclusive report on power abuse at major carrier. The headline screamed across the front page of the Daily Post, one of the nation's most widely circulated tabloids. Beneath it, a carefully selected photo showed Elijah Washington looking stern and intimidating, juxtaposed against a tearful Victoria Whitmore in her pristine airline uniform. The story had broken overnight, a masterclass in narrative manipulation that transformed a child abuse incident into a tale of corporate bullying. Longtime flight attendant Victoria Whitmore is fighting for her career after what colleagues describe as a minor interaction with the unruly child of Horizon Airlines' controversial CEO, the article began. The writer, someone Elijah had never spoken with, claimed to have insider sources confirming that Aiden had been running wild in first class, despite multiple gentle attempts to correct his behavior. Elijah's phone had been ringing non-stop since 5 a.m. The story had been picked up by morning shows, radio programs, and countless online outlets, each version straying further from the truth. By noon, Victoria Whitmore had appeared on Morning America Now, dabbing at carefully manufactured tears. "I've dedicated my life to customer service," she sniffled, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression practiced vulnerability. When the child became disruptive, throwing items and yelling, I simply placed my hand on his shoulder to redirect him. I never expected the CEO to threaten my entire career over good faith cabin management. The interviewer nodded sympathetically. "And you had no idea this was the CEO's son?" "Absolutely not," Victoria lied smoothly. "I would have used the same appropriate techniques with any child." Mr. Washington immediately became hostile, threatening my job, my pension, everything. It felt like discrimination, to be honest. 20 years of perfect service, and one interaction with the boss's son could end everything. Social media erupted with hashtags. "I stand with Victoria" and "Vascar boycott Horizon" trended simultaneously. Comment sections filled with opinions from people who hadn't witnessed the incident, but suddenly considered themselves experts on airplane child discipline and corporate ethics. "Just another entitled CEO thinking the rules don't apply to his family," wrote one commenter with 10,000 likes. "This is what happens when companies prioritize diversity hires over experience," wrote another, thinly veiling the racial undertones that permeated much of the online discourse. The damage extended beyond social media. Horizon Airlines stock had dropped 11% by midday trading. Corporate clients began calling to reconsider their travel arrangements. Boycott groups organized protests at major airport terminals where Horizon operated. Elijah attempted damage control, issuing a press release detailing the actual events with witness statements, but most outlets buried these facts in favor of Victoria's more sensational narrative. His corporate communications team, typically effective, seemed oddly hesitant. Their responses delayed and watered down. The personal attacks grew more vicious and direct. Someone leaked Elijah's home address online, leading to hate mail and threatening phone calls. Security cameras caught 2 teenagers throwing eggs at his garage door while shouting racial epithets. Aiden's preschool called to report that other children were repeating ugly things their parents had said about the Washingtons at the dinner table. "Daddy, Tyler said his mom told him you're a bad man who hurts ladies," Aiden reported quietly after school, his 4-year-old mind struggling to process the sudden hostility from people he had considered friends. "Am I still allowed to play with him?" Elijah's heart broke watching his son navigate this new reality, where he was somehow both victim and villain in a story twisted beyond recognition. That evening, after tucking Aiden into bed with extra reassurances, Elijah noticed a familiar car parked across the street, the driver clearly taking photos of their home. It was during this lowest moment that an unexpected ally emerged. Maya Chen, an investigative reporter known for her meticulous fact-checking and unwillingness to follow pack journalism, contacted Elijah directly. "Mr. Washington, something about this story doesn't add up," she said bluntly during their first phone call. "I specialize in cases where the public narrative diverges from reality, and my instincts are screaming that we're missing crucial context here." While most reporters had simply regurgitated Victoria's tearful account, Maya had taken the time to track down passengers from Flight 1876. She'd found inconsistencies in Victoria's story and was particularly interested in her employment history. "Did you know she worked for 3 other airlines before Horizon?" Maya asked. "I'm having trouble getting details about why she left each position, which is unusual. Clean separations typically come with references willing to speak on record." Maya's investigation provided the first glimmer of hope, but Bradley and his allies were already steps ahead. Just as Maya began publishing her first skeptical pieces questioning the prevailing narrative, the board convened an emergency session, without Elijah's knowledge. "The controversy is damaging shareholder value," announced Charles Blackwell, the board chairman, in a hastily arranged conference call. "Until this matter is resolved, we believe it's in the company's best interest for Elijah to take a temporary leave of absence. We need to stabilize the situation." The vote was 7-2 in favor of removing Elijah from day-to-day operations, a stunning rebuke from the very board he had assembled. Bradley Cooper was named interim CEO, effective immediately. "I want to assure everyone that Horizon Airlines remains committed to excellence and inclusion," Bradley told reporters afterward, the irony of his words lost on the press pool. "This temporary leadership transition allows us to fully investigate all aspects of this unfortunate incident without bias or appearance of conflict." As Elijah watched the announcement on television, his temporary replacement standing confidently at the podium he had designed, the magnitude of the betrayal crystallized. This had never been about Victoria Whitmore or one incident of discrimination. It was a carefully orchestrated coup that had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His company, his reputation, his son's safety. Everything Elijah had built was under assault. Not because he had failed as a leader, but because he had succeeded as a black man in a position of power. They couldn't stand that reality, so they'd created an alternative one where he was the villain. Do you think the media often rushes to judgment before getting all the facts? Comment number 1 if you believe reporters should verify stories more carefully, or number 2 if you think social media is mostly to blame for spreading misinformation. Hit that like button if you're frustrated by how easily the truth got twisted in this situation, and make sure to subscribe for the next part of this shocking story about power, race, and justice. How will Elijah fight back against a system that's already decided he's guilty? Can one man stand against a corporation determined to silence him? Stay tuned to find out if justice will prevail for little Aiden. The Washington home had become something of a fortress, with protesters occasionally gathering at the end of the driveway and reporters camping in vehicles along the street. Elijah had installed additional security cameras and hired private protection for Aiden's school transportation. Inside, father and son existed in a strange limbo of forced seclusion, their world contracted to spaces deemed safe. Elijah sat at his home office desk, staring at screens filled with declining stock prices, negative press coverage, and the occasional supportive message quickly drowned out by orchestrated outrage. His temporary removal as CEO had been extended by another board vote, this time with only one dissenting voice. His creation was slipping away, and with it, any hope of justice for what had happened to Aiden. The doorbell's chime interrupted his dark thoughts. Security footage showed a young black woman in a Horizon Airlines uniform standing nervously on his porch, glancing repeatedly over her shoulder as though expecting to be discovered. Curious, Elijah instructed security to allow her approach. "Mr. Washington?" "I'm Zara Jefferson," she introduced herself when Elijah opened the door. "I was working first class on Flight 1876. I saw everything that happened with your son." Elijah's posture changed immediately, ushering her inside and away from potential observers. Zara Jefferson was in her early 30s, her uniform perfectly pressed despite her obvious anxiety. Once seated in Elijah's living room, she placed her phone on the coffee table between them. "I need to show you something," she said, her voice quiet but determined. "After Victoria slapped your son and was removed from the flight, she didn't immediately leave the airport. She was held in a staff room waiting for Bradley Cooper. I was assigned to monitor her until HR arrived, but she didn't know I could hear her phone conversations." Zara pressed play on a recording. Victoria Whitmore's voice emerged, unfiltered by media coaching or public relations strategies. "I finally gave that entitled brat what he deserved, Karen. Should have seen his face when I put him in his place. His father thinks owning the company means his kind can take over everything. Someone had to show them that's not how the world works." A second voice responded with shocked laughter. "Victoria, you're terrible. Was it really the CEO's kid? Found out too late. But Bradley's handling it. He's been wanting to push Washington out for years. Called it restoring proper management. Said this is the perfect opportunity to correct the company's direction." Elijah listened, his expression hardening with each word. The recording confirmed what he had suspected but couldn't prove. This wasn't about one flight attendant's actions, but a coordinated effort to undermine him. "There's more," Zara said, stopping the recording. "Victoria has a history. Multiple passengers have filed complaints about differential treatment based on race. They're buried in the system, marked as resolved, without action. Some flight attendants have reported her behavior too, but Bradley's office intercepts those complaints." "Why are you showing me this?" Elijah asked quietly. "You're risking your job." Zara straightened her shoulders. "Because I've worked for 4 airlines, Mr. Washington, and Horizon under your leadership was the first place where I felt I could advance based on merit. Since Bradley took over, I've been demoted from international routes. My evaluations have mysteriously dropped, and I'm watching other black employees get pushed aside. What happened to your son is happening to the company, just more slowly and without leaving visible bruises." This meeting marked the beginning of what Elijah would later call his underground resistance. Over the following weeks, a network formed of employees who recognized the injustice unfolding at Horizon Airlines. Zara became his eyes and ears within the company, bringing reports from flight attendants, baggage handlers, and mid-level managers who had witnessed similar discrimination, but feared speaking out. Each new account revealed a pattern more disturbing than isolated incidents. Victoria Whitmore wasn't an anomaly. She was the product of a system that Bradley Cooper and others had carefully maintained beneath the progressive veneer Elijah had established. They had allowed his diversity initiatives to exist on paper while sabotaging them in practice. They've been systematically moving black employees away from premium routes and high-visibility positions, reported Daniel Morris, a scheduling manager who risked meeting Elijah in a remote coffee shop, always with plausible operational explanations, but the pattern is unmistakable when you look at the data. Cabin Service Director Letitia Williams brought passenger surveys showing complaints against minority crew members were pursued aggressively, while similar complaints against white employees disappeared into administrative black holes. Maintenance supervisor Robert Jackson detailed how safety concerns raised by black technicians required triple the documentation of those raised by their white counterparts. While this network grew, Aiden's recovery proved more challenging. The 4-year-old developed nightmares featuring the mean airplane lady, often waking in tears. He became anxious in public, asking Elijah if people looking at them were angry about the airplane. A child psychologist confirmed what Elijah already knew. Aiden was processing trauma beyond his years. What happened to your son wasn't just about one bad day, the psychologist explained gently. It was his first encounter with being seen as less than because of his race. Children absorb these experiences deeply, even when they lack the vocabulary to express them. Watching Aiden struggle strengthened Elijah's resolve. This fight wasn't just about reclaiming his company. It was about creating a world where his son wouldn't face such treatment again. Every new ally, every piece of evidence collected, represented a small step toward that goal. The breakthrough came when Zara discovered something alarming during her shift at headquarters. Bradley had ordered IT to systematically delete all security footage from Flight 1876, but his instructions extended beyond that single incident. He's erasing evidence of every discrimination complaint filed in the past 3 years, Zara reported urgently. Not just Victoria's case, everything that could establish a pattern. The system shows access logs of specific files being deleted. Mr. Washington, they're sanitizing the records. Elijah immediately recognized the implications. They're not just covering up what happened to Aiden, they're eliminating evidence of systemic discrimination throughout the company. That night, Zara took an enormous professional risk. Using her legitimate access credentials but well outside her job duties, she began downloading evidence, complaint records, employee demographic shifts, security footage, anything that might corroborate their case. She had nearly completed the data transfer when footsteps echoed down the supposedly empty corridor. "What are you doing here so late, Ms. Jefferson?" Bradley Cooper's voice froze her in place. He stood in the doorway, eyes narrowing at her station. "Scheduling isn't your department." "Just checking my upcoming rotation, sir," Zara replied, fighting to keep her voice steady as she casually moved to block the screen. "The new system is confusing." Bradley stepped closer, his gaze calculating. "Interesting, because IT flagged unusual download activity from this terminal." Zara's heart hammered as she realized how close she'd come to being caught. Only a timely interruption from security about an unrelated matter created enough distraction for her to discreetly disconnect her drive and slip it into her pocket. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow," Bradley stated as he left, his tone making clear he suspected something. "I expect complete loyalty from all staff during this transition period." The message was unmistakable. The opposition was watching, aware of potential threats to their narrative. The resistance would need to operate with even greater caution, moving forward, but they now possessed something invaluable, proof that could potentially restore justice not just for Aiden, but for everyone Victoria's actions represented. "A racial discrimination lawsuit against his own company," Diana Patel repeated, looking up from the stack of documentation Elijah had provided. "That's unprecedented for a CEO, even a temporarily removed one. You understand the media will have a field day with this?" Diana's law offices occupied the 27th floor of a downtown high-rise, the conference room's panoramic windows offering a view of the city where Elijah had built his business and reputation. As one of the nation's foremost civil rights attorneys, Diana's involvement signaled that Elijah wasn't simply seeking personal vindication, he was preparing for war. "The media already has their narrative," Elijah replied, gesturing to the morning's headlines still portraying him as an aggressive executive, persecuting a helpless employee. "This isn't about public perception anymore. It's about establishing legal precedent and forcing accountability." Diana nodded, dark eyes sharp with analytical precision as she studied the evidence compiled by Elijah's underground network. "Zara." Jefferson sat beside him, having taken personal leave from Horizon to avoid Bradley's increasing scrutiny. The risk to her career was significant, but as she had told Elijah, some things matter more than a job. "What we have here goes far beyond a single incident," Diana observed, organizing documents into categorized stacks. "Victoria's assault on your son was merely the visible eruption of a long simmering pattern. The discrimination is systemic, with clear evidence of upper management complicity. The legal strategy they developed was multi-pronged. A federal discrimination lawsuit naming both Victoria Whitmore and Horizon Airlines as defendants, separate actions for assault against Victoria personally, and corporate malfeasance claims. against Bradley Cooper and board members who had actively participated in the cover-up. Diana's team of investigators soon uncovered something Elijah hadn't known. Victoria Whitmore's history extended beyond Horizon Airlines. She had left 3 previous carriers under suspicious circumstances, each separation accompanied by sealed settlements and non-disclosure agreements. "She's been doing this for years," Diana explained, sliding redacted complaint forms across the table. "Different airlines, same behavior pattern, discriminatory treatment of minority passengers, especially in premium cabins. Each time someone intervened to protect her, negotiate private settlements, and keep her misconduct from becoming public record. And she brought this history to my airline," Elijah said quietly, "right under my nose." Meanwhile, Bradley Cooper and his executive allies weren't idle. Through Zara's contacts, Elijah learned they had convened strategy sessions with Victoria, coaching her on testimony, refining her public image, and preparing a united defense. "They're positioning this as an attack on a dedicated employee by a power-mad executive," Zara reported after meeting with sympathetic colleagues. Bradley told the leadership team that the Washington situation will be permanently resolved within 60 days. The implications were clear. They intended to remove Elijah permanently, sacrificing the founder to protect the system he had unwittingly allowed to flourish within his company. Board members were being privately approached, promises exchanged, alliances solidified against his return. As legal preparations accelerated, an unexpected ally emerged in the public sphere. Maya Chen, the investigative reporter who had first questioned the mainstream narrative, published a carefully researched piece examining Victoria's employment history and the suspicious timing of Elijah's removal. Questions emerge in Horizon Airlines controversy, conflicting accounts and hidden history, marked the first major departure from the villain narrative that had engulfed Elijah. Maya methodically dismantled Victoria's version of events, highlighting witness statements that contradicted her claims and raising pointed questions about Bradley Cooper's rapid ascension to interim CEO. Public opinion, that fickle curator of truth, began showing the first hesitant signs of reassessment. As Maya's reporting gained traction, other journalists started asking more probing questions. Social media users who had initially condemned Elijah without evidence began expressing doubts about the simplistic narrative they'd been fed. These developments didn't escape Bradley's notice. Internal communications obtained by Zara revealed his growing alarm at the shifting public conversation. "The Victoria situation requires immediate containment," read one email to board chairman Charles Blackwell. "Media management has become priority 1. Washington's narrative cannot gain traction." Amateur internet sleuths, galvanized by Maya's reporting, began their own investigations. Victoria's carefully sanitized social media presence wasn't as thoroughly scrubbed as she believed. Screenshots emerged of deleted posts containing racially charged jokes and comments about certain passengers not belonging in first class. These digital breadcrumbs further undermined her cultivated image as a victim of executive overreach. As the tide of public opinion showed signs of turning, Bradley's team moved to protect their key witness. Victoria Whitmore suddenly became unavailable for follow-up interviews, her social media accounts deactivated without explanation. Zara's contacts reported Victoria had been moved to a company-paid hotel suite with strict instructions to avoid all public or press contact. "They're hiding her," Diana concluded during an update meeting in her office. "Our subpoena for her deposition is scheduled for next week. If she's suddenly unavailable or leaves the country, it strengthens our argument about company complicity." Elijah had just returned home from this meeting when he received an anonymous text message with a screenshot of an airline reservation. Victoria Whitmore, traveling under her maiden name, had a one-way first-class ticket to Switzerland departing 2 days before her scheduled deposition. The sender remained unidentified, but the message suggested not everyone in Bradley's circle supported his methods. More disturbing was the financial information that followed: a wire transfer authorization for $500,000 from a Horizon Airlines executive discretionary fund to an account in Victoria's name. Bradley wasn't just hiding his star witness. He was paying her to disappear with enough money to comfortably start a new life beyond U.S. jurisdiction. "He's buying her silence," Diana confirmed after reviewing the documents. This is no longer just discrimination and, assault. It's conspiracy and obstruction of justice. We need to amend our filings immediately. As Elijah's legal team mobilized to prevent Victoria's escape, he spent a quiet evening with Aiden, reading bedtime stories and maintaining the precious normalcy his son desperately needed. The 4-year-old had finally stopped asking why people were angry at his daddy, instead focusing on his newest fascination with dinosaurs and space exploration, innocent interest unsullied by adult prejudice. "Daddy," Aiden asked as Elijah tucked him in, "are you still the airplane boss?" The question cut deeper than the child could know. "Not right now, buddy," Elijah answered carefully, "but I'm working very hard to fix some problems so I can be the airplane boss again." "Good," Aiden mumbled sleepily. "Because you make the best airplanes. The mean lady shouldn't be allowed on them anymore." From the mouths of babes, Elijah thought, gently kissing his son's forehead. The simplicity of children's justice, recognizing wrong and making it right, stood in stark contrast to the labyrinthine system of adult self-interest he was navigating. Yet in Aiden's innocent assessment lay the fundamental truth driving Elijah forward. Some principles were worth fighting for regardless of personal cost. "Your Honor, we request an emergency injunction preventing defendant Victoria Whitmore from leaving the country," Diana Patel argued before Judge William Harrington, her voice steady despite the last-minute nature of the hearing. "We have evidence of a conspiracy to obstruct justice through defendant Whitmore's planned departure to Switzerland, a non-extradition country, 2 days before her scheduled deposition." Judge Harrington peered over half-moon spectacles, his expression impassive as Diana presented flight records and financial transfers documenting the apparent escape plan. Elijah sat at the plaintiff's table, maintaining careful composure despite the urgency of the situation. Across the aisle, Horizon Airlines attorneys exchanged worried glances, clearly blindsided by the evidence being presented. When Diana finished her presentation, the judge removed his glasses thoughtfully. "Compelling evidence, Ms. Patel. I'll grant the temporary—" "Your Honor," interrupted a new voice from the back of the courtroom. Martin Goldsmith, senior partner at the prestigious firm representing Bradley Cooper personally, strode forward. "May I approach? I have relevant information regarding this matter." What followed was a masterclass in legal maneuvering. Goldsmith presented documentation claiming Victoria's travel was pre-approved medical leave for stress treatment at a Swiss wellness facility, with the financial transfer characterized as standard executive care package for employees experiencing work-related trauma. The carefully prepared paperwork bore timestamps and signatures suggesting these arrangements had been made weeks earlier, though Elijah knew with certainty they were recently fabricated. More disturbing was Judge Harrington's immediate receptiveness to these explanations. He nodded repeatedly as Goldsmith spoke, his earlier skepticism evaporating with suspicious speed. When Diana attempted to challenge the obvious inconsistencies, the judge cut her off impatiently. "Ms. Patel, these appear to be legitimate medical arrangements for an employee suffering workplace stress. I see no basis for restricting Ms. Whitmore's movement. Motion denied." As they exited the courtroom, Diana pulled Elijah aside in the hallway, her expression grim. That wasn't normal jurisprudence. Harrington didn't even allow proper rebuttal. Later that afternoon, Zara discovered why. An investigation into Judge Harrington's background revealed he had attended the same exclusive golf club as Bradley Cooper, served together on 2 charitable boards, and most damning, the judge's daughter had recently been hired for a senior position in Horizon's legal department, despite limited relevant experience. He should have recused himself immediately. Diana fumed when presented with this information. This is judicial misconduct, plain and simple. Yet attempting to challenge the judge's impartiality would only delay proceedings, potentially allowing Victoria to leave the country before any new ruling could be secured. They were trapped in a system where even the supposed arbiters of justice had hidden allegiances. This setback marked the beginning of a coordinated campaign against Elijah's legal efforts. Anonymous threats began reaching witnesses who had agreed to testify about Victoria's discriminatory behavior and the corporate culture that enabled it. Several key witnesses suddenly developed memory issues or became unreachable. Others called Diana's office to withdraw their statements, voices tight with unmistakable fear. Zara herself noticed being followed by an unmarked car during routine errands. Private investigators hired by Bradley's team made no attempt to hide their surveillance, their intimidation tactics becoming increasingly brazen as the case progressed. "They want us to know we're being watched," Zara observed with remarkable steadiness despite the pressure. "It's psychological warfare, making us question every move, every conversation." Inside Horizon Airlines, Bradley implemented a strategic program of settlements and separations. Minority employees who had experienced discrimination were offered generous severance packages with ironclad non-disclosure agreements. Those who hesitated received thinly veiled threats about employability concerns should they support Elijah's case. The systematic removal of potential witnesses was executed with clinical precision. Even Elijah's most committed supporters began wavering. James Harmon, his former mentor and the man who had first invested in Horizon, requested a private meeting at his country club. "Elijah, you've built something remarkable," James said, carefully arranging his golf gloves as they sat in the exclusive clubhouse. "But this crusade is destroying shareholder value and your professional future. Sometimes the wisest course is a strategic retreat." "A retreat?" Elijah echoed incredulously. "My 4-year-old son was assaulted because of his race, James. The company I built is being used to protect his attacker and silence anyone who speaks up. What exactly am I supposed to retreat from?" James sighed, avoiding eye contact. "Bradley has the votes to make his position permanent at next month's board meeting. Major clients are privately communicating they're more comfortable with his leadership style. Fighting this will only leave you with nothing. Take the settlement they're preparing. It's very generous." The betrayal from someone Elijah had trusted cut deeply, revealing how thoroughly isolated he had become. Even those who claimed to support him privately were unwilling to risk their own positions and relationships by standing publicly against the established power structure. The legal battle suffered an even more devastating blow when Diana's office was broken into overnight. Security cameras had been professionally disabled, and the intruders targeted very specific materials, all evidence related to Victoria's employment history, witness statements regarding the incident with Aiden, and the financial documentation of her planned departure. The remaining evidence existing in electronic form was insufficient without the original sworn statements and authenticated documents. Police investigators went through the motions of collecting evidence, but Diana recognized the futility. "This wasn't a random break-in," she told Elijah grimly. "They knew exactly what to take, exactly when to strike, and exactly how to make it look like a routine burglary. We're facing opponents with resources and connections throughout the system." The final hammer fell 2 days later in Judge Harrington's courtroom. With key evidence mysteriously missing and witnesses suddenly unavailable, the judge granted the defense motion to dismiss the entire case for insufficient evidentiary basis. Furthermore, Judge Harrington added with poorly disguised satisfaction, "The court finds the plaintiff's claims sufficiently without merit to justify defendant's request for recovery of legal fees." Not only had Elijah lost his case, he was now ordered to pay the legal expenses of the very people who had orchestrated his son's trauma and the subsequent cover-up. The systematic dismantling of justice had been executed with frightening efficiency. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed as Bradley Cooper delivered a prepared statement. "Horizon Airlines is gratified that these baseless accusations have been properly dismissed. We remain committed to our inclusive corporate culture and look forward to putting this unfortunate chapter behind us." No mention of Aiden, no acknowledgement of the assault that hundreds had witnessed. Just corporate platitudes crafted to close the book on an inconvenient disruption to business as usual. As cameras flashed and microphones captured Bradley's carefully rehearsed concern for healing the company, Elijah stood silently at the periphery, watching justice slip away, not through honest defeat, but through methodical corruption of the very systems designed to protect the vulnerable. What would you do if the entire system was rigged against you? Comment number 1 if you think Elijah should keep fighting despite everything, or number 2 if you believe sometimes you have to know when to walk away from a rigged game. Hit that like button if you're shocked by how deeply corruption can run through our institutions. Make sure to subscribe for the next installment where we'll see if Elijah finds a way forward when every door seems closed. With his company taken, his reputation damaged, and even the courts failing him, what options remain? Can justice ever prevail against such overwhelming odds? Stay tuned to find out what happens next in this shocking true story of power and prejudice in corporate America. Elijah Washington stood alone at the panoramic windows of his home office, watching rain streak down the glass in rivulets that mirrored his cascading losses. The legal defeat had been total. Case dismissed, reputation shattered, finances strained by mounting legal costs he'd been ordered to cover. Even Diana Patel, ever the fighter, had been forced to acknowledge the systemic blockade they faced at every turn. The formal board meeting to permanently remove him as CEO was scheduled for tomorrow morning. After weeks of carefully orchestrated pressure, Bradley Cooper had secured the votes needed to complete his corporate takeover. The proxy statements had been filed, the press release drafted, the transition already treated as a foregone conclusion by industry analysts and former allies alike. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer, his former executive assistant who still risked her position to keep him informed. BC has scheduled management restructuring for Friday, complete overhaul of diversity initiatives, ZJ being investigated for expense irregularities. They're setting her up. Zara Jefferson, whose courage had provided their only real evidence, was now being systematically destroyed as a witness. The fabricated expense fraud allegations would make any testimony from her appear self-serving and retaliatory, effectively neutralizing one of their last credible voices. The doorbell rang, revealing a messenger with a thick envelope bearing the Horizon Airlines logo. Inside was the formal separation agreement Bradley's team had prepared, a multi-million-dollar severance package contingent upon Elijah signing comprehensive non-disclosure and non-disparagement clauses. The message was clear: take the money, walk away, and never speak publicly about Victoria Whitmore or discrimination at Horizon again. Beside the corporate documents lay a smaller envelope containing Aiden's junior executive wings pin, returned from the company offices where it had been displayed in a case of significant company memorabilia. The small gold pin glinted accusingly in Elijah's palm, another piece of his son's innocence casually discarded. That evening, tucking Aiden into bed, Elijah struggled to maintain the protective facade he'd constructed around their home life. Despite his best efforts, the stress had seeped through, affecting the normally energetic 4-year-old. "Daddy," Aiden asked as Elijah adjusted his dinosaur comforter, "do bad people always win?" The question froze Elijah mid-motion. "What makes you ask that, buddy?" "Tyler at school said his dad told him the mean airplane lady got promoted, and you got fired because that's how the world works." Aiden's innocent eyes searched his father's face for reassurance. "He said some people always get away with being mean." Elijah carefully sat on the edge of the bed, buying time to compose a response that wouldn't burden his son with adult cynicism, yet wouldn't perpetuate false hopes. "The world isn't always fair right away, Aiden. Sometimes good people have to work extra hard to make things right." "But are you giving up?" Aiden persisted with the devastating directness of children. "Ms. Patrice at school says we should never give up when something's important." The question hit with the force of revelation. Was he giving up? The separation papers waited downstairs, the pen positioned precisely atop the signature line. 1. Signature and the financial security of his family would be guaranteed, the legal harassment would end, and he could begin rebuilding his life elsewhere. But what would that teach Aiden? That justice was negotiable, that standing against wrong had limits, that principled fights should be abandoned when the cost grew too steep. Meanwhile, Maya Chen's continued investigation into Victoria's background had reached frustrating dead ends. Corporate sources stopped returning calls. Witnesses who had initially agreed to speak retracted their cooperation, and even public records seemed to vanish from databases. The wall of silence surrounding Victoria Whitmore had been masterfully constructed. Victoria herself had returned from her brief medical leave in Switzerland, resuming a carefully managed public presence. Bradley had arranged for her to join Horizon's executive training program, a promotion presented as recognition of her resilience under unprecedented stress. Photos of Victoria leading diversity workshops appeared in company newsletters, a cynical attempt to rebrand her as a champion of inclusion. Within the company, Zara reported through encrypted messages that employees who had supported Elijah were being systematically transferred to undesirable routes. Their performance reviews, suddenly documenting concerns that hadn't existed before. The purge was methodical, designed to leave no traces of discrimination while effectively eliminating every ally Elijah had cultivated. The notification that Zara herself had been suspended pending investigation arrived on the same day Elijah discovered racist graffiti sprayed across his garage door, crude slurs and threats that required him to explain to Aiden why they needed to stay with Elijah's parents temporarily. The message couldn't have been clearer. Continued resistance would only bring more severe consequences. That night, sitting in his childhood bedroom in his parents' home while Aiden slept fitfully down the hall, Elijah finally began drafting his resignation letter. The words came mechanically, corporate platitudes about seeking new opportunities and wishing the company continued success. Each sentence felt like a surrender, not just of his position but of the principles that had guided his career. His father appeared in the doorway, observing silently before speaking. "I remember when you started that airline. Everyone said you'd fail within 6 months." Elijah looked up wearily. Maybe they were right after all. "That's not my son talking," the older man replied, entering the room and sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "My son built something from nothing because he refused to accept the world as it was. He saw barriers and found ways through them, over them, or around them. This is different, Dad. They have everything. The company, the courts, the media. They've taken it all." His father's weathered hand rested on the resignation letter, covering the words of surrender. "They haven't taken your voice. They haven't taken your truth. And most importantly, they haven't taken your example to that boy sleeping down the hall. He's watching you, Elijah, learning what a man does when the world shows its ugliest face." The simple wisdom pierced Elijah's despair. Aiden's question echoed in his mind. Do bad people always win? The answer would be determined not by Victoria Whitmore or Bradley Cooper, but by his own willingness to continue fighting when victory seemed impossible. With sudden clarity, Elijah tore the resignation letter in half. He wouldn't sign Bradley's separation agreement. He wouldn't quietly disappear. If they wanted to remove him from the company he built, they would have to do it publicly, with the whole world watching. He might have lost this battle, but surrendering the war was a choice he didn't have to make. Not when Aiden's understanding of justice hung in the balance. "Mr. Washington, my name is Kevin Delgado. I worked in IT at Horizon until last month." The voice on the phone sounded nervous but determined. "I have something you should see." Elijah had received dozens of crank calls since his case became public, but something about this caller's specificity made him listen. "What is it exactly?" "Complete security footage from Flight 1876, all angles, full audio. I was the systems administrator responsible for video backups when Bradley ordered everything deleted. I made a copy first." 60 minutes later, Elijah and Diana Patel sat in her office, watching crystal-clear footage that documented every moment of Victoria's assault on Aiden. The multiple camera angles captured her deliberate provocations, her aggression, and most damningly, her clear racial animus expressed in muttered comments picked up by sensitive microphones. "This changes everything," Diana said, pausing the video where Victoria's hand connected with Aiden's face. Complete contradiction of her sworn testimony. Proof of perjury, assault, and civil rights violations. Kevin Delgado sat nervously across from them, hands fidgeting on his lap. "There's more. After I was terminated for performance issues, which started immediately after I questioned the deletion request, I archived everything I could access. Financial records, HR complaints, internal communications about diversity hiring. Bradley Cooper and his team have been systematically undermining your initiatives for years." As Diana began cataloging this new evidence, Elijah received a text from an unknown number. "Check your email. Passenger in 2A recorded everything. Wanted to come forward sooner but was threatened. Not afraid anymore." The attached video, shot from a passenger's phone, provided another angle of the assault. More importantly, it captured Victoria's unguarded comments immediately after, including explicit racial slurs that removed any doubt about her motivations. These developments coincided with notification from the Department of Transportation that they had opened an independent investigation into discrimination complaints at Horizon Airlines. The federal inquiry, triggered by multiple passenger reports similar to Aiden's experience, operated outside the jurisdiction of the local courts that had failed Elijah so completely. That same afternoon, Maya Chen called with her own breakthrough. I found 3 former passengers who filed complaints about Victoria at her previous airlines. All racial discrimination cases, all settled with NDAs. But here's the key. One victim was a minor child of a Japanese diplomat. The family kept their own documentation despite the settlement restrictions. The pieces were falling into place with startling speed. After weeks of systematic obstruction, multiple independent sources were suddenly breaking through the barricades Bradley had constructed. Elijah's phone lit up with a call from an unexpected source. William Kingsley, Horizon Airlines' largest institutional investor. Washington, we need to talk. These allegations about corporate governance irregularities have my risk management team concerned. This isn't about one incident anymore. It's about fiduciary responsibility and potential securities violations. The financial implications of Bradley's cover-up had finally penetrated the protective shield of corporate solidarity. Kingsley represented billions in investment capital, and his concerns about governance irregularities translated to serious questions about Horizon's leadership, questions that threatened stock value in ways the board couldn't ignore. Meanwhile, Victoria Whitmore's carefully constructed public rehabilitation began unraveling. Emboldened by others coming forward, a flight attendant who had worked with Victoria for years shared screenshots of text messages where Victoria boasted about how she handled minority passengers who didn't know their place in premium cabins. The most damaging blow came from Victoria herself. Growing increasingly confident after months of protection from Bradley's team, she became careless. During a management training session, she typed a message intended for a private group chat of executive allies, complaining about diversity, hires diluting standards, and mocking the absurd sensitivity around disciplining that Washington brat. Instead, she accidentally sent it to the company-wide distribution list. The message reached every employee at Horizon Airlines simultaneously, including those who had been skeptical of Elijah's claims. The unfiltered racism in Victoria's words, coupled with her casual reference to assaulting Aiden as appropriate discipline, shattered any remaining illusion that she had been unfairly accused. By evening, Zara Jefferson had organized an impromptu employee meeting that quickly evolved into plans for a company-wide walkout. Pilots, flight attendants, ground crew, and even administrative staff pledged to suspend operations for 24 hours unless the board took immediate action regarding Victoria Whitmore and Bradley Cooper. As these events unfolded with dizzying speed, Maya Chen prepared to publish her most comprehensive article yet, a detailed exposé backed by authenticated documents, witness statements, and the unedited security footage Kevin Delgado had preserved. Her editor had given the story front-page treatment, scheduling publication for 5 a.m. the following day to maximize impact on morning news cycles. That night, Elijah sat with Aiden on their rebuilt front porch, watching fireflies dance across the summer garden. The boy's nightmares had begun to recede, replaced by tentative excitement about returning to his normal activities. "Are you going to be the airplane boss again?" Aiden asked, leaning trustingly against his father's side. "I don't know yet, buddy," Elijah answered honestly. "But something important is happening. Remember how we talked about standing up when things aren't fair even when it's hard?" Aiden nodded solemnly. "Like Rosa Parks on the bus in my history book." "That's right. Well, a lot of people are standing up now because they saw something unfair happen to you. They're being brave together." Aiden considered this with 4-year-old seriousness. "So the mean lady won't win." Elijah hugged his son close, watching the fireflies blink like distant stars. "I think a lot of people are working very hard to make sure she doesn't, buddy." As Aiden drifted to sleep that night, Elijah stood at the window watching the digital clock tick toward midnight. In a few hours, Maya's story would publish. Employee. Walkouts would begin with the first shifts. Federal investigators would arrive at corporate headquarters with subpoenas. The carefully constructed narrative that had nearly destroyed him would face its first real challenge. Whether this would bring justice or merely another sophisticated counterattack remained uncertain. But for the first time since Victoria's hand had struck his son's face, Elijah felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Airline scandal exposed. Assault cover-up reveals pattern of discrimination at Horizon. Maya Chen's expose hit the digital front page at exactly 5:00 a.m., accompanied by the unedited security footage showing Victoria Whitmore's assault on Aiden Washington. By 5:15, the story had been picked up by national news networks. By 6:00, Hak Horizon discrimination and Hak justice for Aiden were trending nationally. By 6:30, Horizon Airlines' stock had triggered circuit breakers with its precipitous pre-market decline. The article methodically dismantled the false narrative, presenting irrefutable evidence of not only Victoria's actions, but the systematic cover-up orchestrated by Bradley Cooper and complicit board members. Most damning was the documented pattern of discrimination against minority employees and passengers, supported by testimony from current and former staff who had broken their silence overnight. As dawn broke, Horizon Airlines faced a multi-front crisis. At major hubs across the country, employees failed to report for morning shifts, creating cascading flight delays. Customer service lines were flooded with passengers demanding refunds and explanations. Institutional investors demanded emergency meetings with board leadership. Federal investigators arrived at corporate headquarters with warrants for financial and personnel records related to discrimination complaints and their handling. William Kingsley, representing Horizon's largest shareholder group, issued a public statement that sent tremors through the financial markets. In light of serious governance concerns revealed today, we are demanding immediate board action to address leadership failures and restore integrity to Horizon Airlines operations. Failure to act decisively will result in our voting to replace the entire board at the upcoming shareholder meeting. The threat of a major investor revolt finally accomplished what moral arguments could not. Board Chairman Charles Blackwell, whose carefully cultivated reputation as a corporate statesman was now at risk, called an emergency session. The boardroom that had witnessed Elijah's removal months earlier now became the stage for a dramatic reversal. "This situation has become untenable," Blackwell announced to the assembled directors, his voice tight with controlled panic. "The legal exposure, regulatory scrutiny, and shareholder concerns present existential threats to the company. We must take immediate corrective action." The board vote was unanimous. Victoria Whitmore would be terminated immediately. Bradley, Cooper, and two senior executives closely involved in the cover-up would be placed on administrative leave pending a comprehensive investigation. And most significantly, Elijah Washington would be reinstated as CEO with expanded authority to implement structural reforms addressing discrimination within the company. The announcement temporarily stabilized Horizon's plummeting stock price, but the crisis was far from over. At Chicago O'Hare International Airport, Victoria Whitmore was intercepted by federal agents as she attempted to board a flight to Canada. The charges included assault of a minor, civil rights violations, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The footage of Victoria being escorted through the terminal in handcuffs, broadcast live on national news, provided a visual counterpoint to her tearful television appearances months earlier. Meanwhile, Bradley Cooper arrived at corporate headquarters to find his access credentials deactivated and security waiting to escort him from the premises. His executive office was already being sealed by federal investigators, gathering evidence of financial improprieties discovered during the discrimination investigation. Unauthorized payments, misappropriated funds, and selective enforcement of company policies based on race. By mid-afternoon, Elijah Washington walked through the headquarters lobby for the first time since his removal. Employees lined the atrium, many wearing "Justice for Aiden" buttons that had spontaneously appeared. Throughout the company, their applause built slowly at first, then crescendoed into a thunderous welcome that echoed through all 17 floors. The executive suite had been transformed in his absence, company values plaques replaced with golf tournament photos, diversity initiative documentation archived in storage. Reversing Bradley's aesthetic and substantive changes would take time, but symbolic restoration began immediately with Elijah's first official act, reinstating Zara Jefferson and appointing her to lead a newly created Office of Inclusion and Accountability with direct reporting lines to the CEO and board. "Your courage made this possible," Elijah told her as they surveyed the challenges ahead. "When everyone else calculated the personal cost and stayed silent, you risked everything to stand for what's right." The judicial system that had failed so completely began a painful self-correction. Judge William Harrington announced his immediate retirement amid ethics investigations into his undisclosed relationships with Horizon executives. The district attorney opened a criminal investigation into the suspicious break-in at Diana Patel's office, with evidence pointing to private security contractors hired through shell companies linked to Bradley's personal attorney. Victoria Whitmore's legal strategy collapsed under the weight of irrefutable video evidence. Faced with multiple felony charges and the prospect of years in prison, she accepted a plea agreement requiring full cooperation with ongoing investigations into discriminatory practices at Horizon and the airlines where she had previously worked. Her public statement acknowledging her actions and their racial motivations provided a measure of vindication, though nothing could fully heal the trauma inflicted on Aiden. The corporate culture that had enabled Victoria required more profound intervention. Elijah implemented comprehensive reforms, including mandatory bias training, anonymous reporting systems for discriminatory incidents, and independent review of all passenger complaints involving potential discrimination. Most importantly, he established transparent promotion criteria and removed the informal networks that had allowed Bradley's faction to consolidate power through preferential advancement of those who shared their biases. "Changing policies is the easy part," Elijah explained during a company-wide address. "Changing culture requires sustained commitment and accountability at every level. What happened to my son wasn't an isolated incident. It was the visible symptom of systemic problems that hurt passengers, employees, and ultimately our business." The legal vindication came when a new judge reinstated Elijah's lawsuit with the expanded evidence base, leading to substantial settlements for discrimination victims and structural remedies enforceable by court oversight. Bradley Cooper and several board members faced personal liability for their roles in covering up discriminatory practices, with several ultimately settling shareholder lawsuits for millions. But the most meaningful moment for Elijah came weeks later, when Aiden asked to visit the airport again. The boy had developed anxiety about flying since the assault, but after careful preparation with his therapist, felt ready to see airplanes again, an important step in reclaiming his childhood enthusiasm. As they walked through the terminal, toward the observation deck, Aiden squeezed his father's hand tightly when uniformed flight attendants approached. But instead of fear, he was met with gentle smiles and respectful distance. Several crew members recognized him, offering small waves but carefully avoiding overwhelming the child who had become an unintentional symbol of their collective reckoning. "Look, Daddy," Aiden whispered, pointing to a recruitment poster featuring staff members of diverse backgrounds gathering around a Horizon Airlines plane. "That looks like Ms. Zara." Elijah followed his son's gaze to the newly designed advertisement where Zara Jefferson indeed stood prominently among the featured employees. The tagline read, "Horizon Airlines, where everyone belongs." It was a small thing, corporate marketing designed to rebuild a damaged brand. But in Aiden's cautious smile as he studied the image, Elijah glimpsed something profoundly important. His son beginning to believe, once again, that the world could be fair, that wrong actions had consequences, and that standing against injustice wasn't futile after all. The long journey toward healing, for Aiden, for the company, for a system that had nearly failed them completely, had only begun. But watching his son's face light up as a Horizon plane soared overhead, Elijah allowed himself to believe that justice, while imperfect and delayed, had finally taken flight. 1 year had passed since the moment that changed everything, a single act of discrimination that revealed systemic failures and ultimately forced a reckoning throughout Horizon Airlines and beyond. The company headquarters buzzed with activity as employees prepared for the anniversary conference appropriately titled Transforming Corporate Culture: Lessons from Crisis. Elijah Washington stood at the windows of his restored office, watching aircraft bearing the redesigned Horizon logo taxi across the distant runways. Each bore the new tagline, "Rising Together Beneath the Company Name," a public commitment to the values nearly lost during the darkest chapter of their corporate history. The transformation had been comprehensive. Victoria Whitmore's guilty plea to assault and civil rights violations had resulted in 3 months incarceration, followed by extensive community service at minority youth organizations. More significantly, the court had mandated her participation in intensive anti-racism training programs, the results of which she now shared as a case study in bias intervention. Victoria would never work in aviation again, but her journey from entitled aggressor to reluctant accountability had become an unexpected educational tool. Her court-ordered public speaking engagements describing her awakening to privilege and prejudice reached thousands of corporate employees across industries. Her personal descent and partial redemption illustrating the human cost of unchecked bias. Bradley Cooper and his executive allies had faced more severe consequences. Federal investigators had uncovered financial improprieties beyond the discrimination cover-up, selective contract awards, misappropriated funds, falsified performance metrics designed to prevent minority advancement. The resulting charges for conspiracy, fraud, and obstruction of justice had sent several former executives to federal prison, with Bradley himself awaiting sentencing after multiple guilty verdicts. The board overhaul demanded by major investors had replaced 2/3 of directors with individuals committed to governance, transparency, and authentic diversity initiatives. The new leadership structure included expanded oversight authorities, specifically focused on workplace culture and discrimination prevention, with quarterly metrics shared publicly as part of corporate reporting. Most gratifying for Elijah had been Zara Jefferson's transformation from whistleblower to institutional change agent. As Executive Vice President for Inclusion and Accountability, she had built a department that operated with genuine authority, able to influence hiring, promotion, and policy decisions throughout the company. The diverse team she assembled consulted with other airlines establishing similar structures, extending their impact throughout the industry. The latest employee satisfaction numbers just came in, Zara reported during their morning briefing, sliding a tablet across Elijah's desk. 87% report feeling respected regardless of background, up 23 points from last year. Retention rates for minority employees have stabilized at industry-leading levels. The statistics represented more than corporate metrics. They reflected thousands of individual experiences improved through structural changes that prevented abuses like Victoria's from recurring. Each percentage point signified employees who no longer feared discrimination without recourse, passengers who could expect consistent treatment regardless of appearance, and a workplace where merit determined advancement rather than unacknowledged bias. These transformations hadn't happened easily or without resistance. Implementing comprehensive reforms required constant vigilance against subtle sabotage and institutional inertia. Several executives who couldn't adapt to the new requirements had departed, some loudly claiming reverse discrimination or excessive political correctness on their way out. But for each departure, multiple new hires arrived bringing fresh perspectives and authentic commitment to the reformed culture. The congressional hearing where Elijah testified about corporate discrimination had catalyzed industry-wide examination of airline practices. His powerful testimony about Aiden's experience and the subsequent cover-up attempt had silenced even the most skeptical committee members. The resulting legislative proposals, dubbed the Washington Standards by industry press, promised to establish uniform requirements for bias prevention training, incident reporting, and executive accountability. "Daddy, are we going to be late?" 5-year-old Aiden's voice pulled Elijah from his reflections. The boy stood in the office doorway wearing his junior executive badge, excitement evident in his bouncing energy. "You promised we could see the new plane before everyone else." Aiden's recovery had been the most meaningful measure of the year's progress. Through careful therapy, consistent support, and honest age-appropriate discussions about what had happened, he had gradually reclaimed his love of aviation. The nightmares had faded, replaced by renewed enthusiasm for all things flight-related. Most importantly, he had regained the foundational security every child deserves, belief in a world that protects rather than harms them. "We've got plenty of time, buddy," Elijah assured him, gathering the presentation materials for today's unveiling ceremony. The new plane isn't going anywhere without us. The new plane represented Horizon's most visible commitment to transformation. Their first aircraft dedicated to community service and accessibility initiatives. Named Rising Justice, it would provide free transportation for medical patients unable to afford travel costs, educational journeys for underserved school districts, and emergency response capacity during natural disasters. The project combined operational excellence with social responsibility, embodying the reformed values Elijah had fought to restore. As they walked through headquarters toward the airfield, employees greeted them with genuine warmth rather than the wary deference that had characterized Bradley's tenure. Aiden high-fived familiar faces, his confidence in these spaces fully restored through positive experiences systematically created to replace traumatic memories. The ceremony itself exemplified the company's evolution. Diverse speakers including Zara shared perspectives on the journey from crisis to transformation. Community partners described programs enabled by Horizon's renewed commitment to social responsibility. Most movingly, several passengers and employees shared personal experiences of discrimination before the reforms, contrasted with the improvements they'd witnessed over the past year. When Elijah rose to deliver the keynote address, he began, not with corporate platitudes but with personal truth. 1 year ago, my son was assaulted because of his race in a space that should have been safe for everyone. That moment revealed not just one person's prejudice, but systematic failures throughout our company and industry. The painful revelation ultimately forced us to become better than we were, but we should never have required such a catastrophic failure to address these fundamental issues. The audience's attentive silence acknowledged the unflinching assessment. Elijah continued, "The reforms we've implemented aren't perfect, and our work remains unfinished. But the progress we've made proves something essential about institutional change. When problems seem insurmountable, focused effort from committed individuals can transform even the most resistant systems. Each of you has contributed to that transformation, and each of you holds responsibility for ensuring it continues." After the ceremony, as attendees toured the new aircraft, Elijah noticed Aiden deep in conversation with a young black family hesitantly approaching the boarding stairs. The parents appeared nervous about entering the first-class cabin where staff were conducting tours, their body language suggesting the habitual caution of those accustomed to being unwelcome in exclusive spaces. "It's really cool inside," Aiden was telling their daughter, who appeared about his age. "My dad says everybody's allowed to see it today. You can sit in any seat you want." Watching his son's innocent dismantling of invisible barriers, Elijah recognized the most profound measure of their progress. Aiden wasn't simply recovering from trauma, he was instinctively creating the inclusive environment that should have protected him. The 5-year-old understood something that Victoria Whitmore and Bradley Cooper never had. The fundamental human right to dignity transcended artificial hierarchies of race or status. As the family cautiously followed Aiden into the aircraft, another Horizon flight rumbled overhead, banking gracefully against the summer sky. Elijah watched its ascent with quiet satisfaction, recognizing that the company he had built, lost, and reclaimed was finally becoming what he had always envisioned, not merely an airline, but a vehicle for transforming how people moved through the world, respecting the equality of every passenger regardless of appearance or background. The path to this moment had required confronting the worst of human prejudice, navigating corrupt systems designed to protect power rather than justice, and persevering when victory seemed impossible. The costs had been painfully high, especially for Aiden. But watching his son proudly showing the young girl the cockpit viewports, Elijah witnessed the ultimate vindication of their difficult journey. A child who had experienced racial trauma, now confidently creating spaces where everyone belonged. That transformation, from victim to empowered change agent, represented the most meaningful triumph of all. Justice had not merely been served, it had taken flight, soaring beyond individual accountability towards systemic transformation that would protect countless children who would never know how close the system had come to failing them entirely. This powerful story teaches us several profound lessons about racism and justice in modern America. First, discrimination often operates beneath seemingly professional facades, revealing itself in moments of stress or perceived impunity. Victoria's assault on Aiden exposed biases that had long been hidden behind corporate policies and practiced smiles. Second, systems naturally protect those who embody their historical values, even when formal leadership changes. Despite Elijah's position as CEO, entrenched networks mobilized to defend Victoria and undermine him, showing how power structures resist meaningful diversity beyond superficial representation. Third, true justice requires collective courage. Individual victims rarely overcome systemic discrimination alone. Elijah's vindication came only when multiple witnesses, employees, and investigators chose moral principle over personal security, creating a critical mass that could no longer be silenced. Perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that institutions don't change through policies alone, but through persistent accountability at every level. The transformed Horizon Airlines succeeded not through temporary outrage, but through sustained, structural reforms with measurable outcomes and transparent reporting. Finally, we see that healing from racial trauma is possible, but requires both individual support and systemic change. Aiden's recovery came through personal care and witnessing actual consequences for wrongdoing, rebuilding his faith in a just world. His transformation from victim to confident inclusion advocate represents our highest aspiration, creating spaces where everyone truly belongs. What moments in this story resonated most deeply with you? Drop a comment sharing when you've witnessed someone stand up against discrimination like Zara did, or when you've experienced systemic barriers to justice. If you believe children deserve protection from racial trauma, hit that like button to help spread awareness. Subscribe for more powerful stories that expose uncomfortable truths about how discrimination operates in modern America and the courage required to fight it. Thank you for taking this journey through the skies injustice with us. May we all find Elijah's persistence, Zara's courage, and ultimately, Aiden's healing in our own lives. Together, we can create a world where belonging isn't determined by appearance but by our shared humanity.